Hey, welcome here, everybody. I'm so glad that you've joined us. This, of course, is the Institute for Religion, Peace, and Justice, which is a department of St. Stephen's University in New Brunswick, Canada. And today's a special day in that it's our closing session for the students that are in their IRPJ certificate. And I've gathered a group of friends here, truly friends, in an interfaith fellowship, or we have different ways of referring to that, but specifically we've got our friends Safi, Nahid, Mark, Dawud, and Mercy, and we've all joined together today because we want to share a little bit about our experience of and our practice in mutual respect across faiths. And it's somehow this mutual respect has led to friendship, that's led to cooperation, and that we collaborate in this world as peacemakers. And I want to begin by saying how grateful I am for the generosity that I've experienced from my Muslim and Jewish brothers and sisters, particularly as they've shown grace when I put my foot in my mouth or when I ask questions that may seem ignorant. They never seem to condescend to me. They welcome my questions. They make it safe for me to ask things that it could feel like I'm walking on eggshells. And in that experience, it has done marvels in dissolving stereotypes that I've inherited as a child, that I see daily in the news. And so what happens for me is when folks may make a statement about Jews or Muslims, about who they are, what they believe, what they practice, and so on, I can say, well, that's one way to see it, but it's not been my experience. Let me tell you about my friend Mark. Let me tell you about my friend Safi. Let me tell you how even Christians working in the Middle East who have transcended the polarities and tried to do things like Mercy is doing in Bethlehem right now. Let me tell you about my friend Nahid, and let me introduce you to Dawud. That's been super valuable in terms of my other contexts where I'm seeing Christians who come with an edge of hostility or othering, and it can be conservatives on the right who are angry at Muslims. It can be progressives on the left who are angry at Jews. And I'm like, you're not seeing a whole picture. It begins by knowing real people and hearing their stories and relating to them as friends and seeing how you can cooperate as peacemakers. And I'm just really, really impressed that what can happen in a short time in that way. The function of today then is to hear my friends share their experience and practice of mutual respect, and then to open it up so that the students can ask questions and that you can relate. And my not very secret agenda is that after this class that you could have the same kind of conversations and say, when you run into someone who spouts a stereotype that is and hostility concerning Muslims or Jews, then you could say, well, you know what, I've actually had an experience of talking directly with people from those traditions, and my experience is not what you're describing. Perhaps I could invite you to the same kind of experience. So that's a little bit where we're coming from today. And so it's my great pleasure to ask each of them to share their perspective. And I'll start with Safi. And again, I'd ask all of the presenters today over the next hour or so, just to begin with an introduction of who you are, where you live, and what you're up to in this world. Over to you, Safi.
Thank you. Brothers and sisters, assalamu alaikum. Peace be with you. I'm going to share with you my understanding of respect. Respect means that I accept somebody for who they are, even when they're different from me or when I don't agree with them. Prophet Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, peace be upon him, is a great source of inspiration for us in this matter. He was kind and courteous toward everyone. Therefore, this should be applied to ourselves too. It is the duty of every Muslim to learn the lifestyle of the Prophet, peace be upon him, because we are at our best when we are good representatives of his teachings. The Quran, the holy book of Islam, revealed to Prophet Muhammad over a period of 23 years, teaches that a human being, by his very creation, deserve regard and respect. This respect is a natural birthright to each human being, regardless of religion, color, national origin, or gender. God told us in the Quran, we have indeed honored the children of Adam and provided for them means of transportation on land and sea, and given them wholesome food, and exalted them high above the greater part of our creation. This is the Quran, chapter 17, verse 70. According to the saying of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, one who believes in God and the last day must honor his neighbor, and one who believes in God and the last day must honor his guests. Our love and devotion of God finds expression in the way we treat others, in the form of our relations with others. One who is a true believer has an inner urge to love everyone and everything created by God. There are 5 divine guidelines that the Quran clearly presents to Muslims for building tolerance and understanding among people. The first one, everyone, God's given human dignity must be respected. It's God-given human dignity. And because of that, everyone must be respected, regardless of his or her faith, race, ethnic origin, gender, or social status. The Quran teaches, we have indeed honored the children of Adam. This is chapter 17, verse 70. Because everyone is created by God Almighty, the maker of all, human beings must treat one another with full honor, respect, fairness, and equitability. Number 2, Islam teaches it is by divine will that God's human creation follows different religions or no religion. The Quran says, had your Lord willed, he could have made all human beings one single community, but he willed it otherwise. Hence, they'll continue to have divergent views. Chapter 11, verse 118. The Quran states clearly that freedom of religion is a God-given right. There is no compulsion in religion. The difference between guidance and error has been made clear. God said, whoever rejects false God and believes in God has grasped firm, unshaken support. God hears all and knows all. This is in chapter 2, verse 256. Number 4, the final judgment of all humanity lies in the hand of God, not in our hands. Their Creator will judge them, he to whom we all ultimately return. The Quran says, God is our Lord and your Lord. We have our deeds and you have your deeds. Let there be no quarrels between you and us. God will bring us all together, and to him is the ultimate return. Chapter 42, verse 15. And the last one, number 5, God loves justice and those who strive to practice it, especially toward people who are different from them in any way, including in matters of religious belief. The Quran says, believers, be steadfast in your devotion to God, equitably bearing witness to the truth. Never let hatred of any people lead you to deviate from being just to them. Be just, for that is closer to being mindful of God. Always be mindful of God. God is well aware of what you do. Chapter 5, verse 8. But the acid test is when we talk about our enemy, about an enemy, any enemy. What does the Quran teaches us about how to deal with our enemies? The Quran says, good and evil are never equal. Repel evil with goodness. and your enemy will become like an intimate friend. Chapter 41, verse 34. It is wise to stand a little bit and try to examine what the Quran is saying here. It's saying good and evil are never equal. Repel evil with goodness. In other words, someone is transgressing against you, insulting you. You can insult them back or try to repel evil with goodness, smiling, being nice, being understanding, trying to be forgiving. All these qualities are part of a character that Islam tried to build in a Muslim. I would admit that this is not always a successful task, but as Muslim, we are all striving all the time to be the best we can be. And this is very important for every Muslim. It is called in Arabic tazkiyah, making myself a better version of who I am today. By the end of the day, if I'm not a better version of who I was in the morning, that means I failed in tazkiyah, in making myself a better human being all the time. So this task is important for the life of every Muslim. In conclusion, why are we created different? What is the purpose of making us so different when God could have created us more harmonious and loving? Well, this question is only a simple question that all of us would think about if we are thinking logically. Basically, because the Quran teaches us that we are here to be tested. People they think they are making hundreds and thousands of decisions every day, all day long. In fact, they are making one of two decisions all the time, all their life. The two matters are, am I doing this to please God, or am I doing it to please myself, my own ego? Like coming here today, am I coming to participate in this so people can say, oh, this guy Kaskas is, he knows the Quran, he's a great guy. This, if I do it because of this, then I am doing it to serve my own selfishness. If I am here because I want to spread love, I want to spread knowledge, I want to share what I know with other people, I want to share my time with students that are about to graduate, and I want them to take with them these values and practice them. These, by the way, are not just Islamic values. They're not only in the Quran. They're not taught to us only by Prophet Muhammad, peace be with him. They were also in the Bible. They're in the Gospels. They were living and practiced by Jesus, peace be with him. So we're talking about universal values. Whether you are a Christian or a Muslim, respecting the others is essential if you want to adhere to the teachings of your book. With this, I will stop, and I hope everyone to a lot of respect, a lot of success in their life, and I love you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Safi, and we love you as well. It's such a pleasure to be friends with you, and I'm also very grateful for your clear-minded teaching and the way you've created these connections for us. You established new friendships, and specific to that, I want to now invite Nahid to share, because what a great new friend I found in her, and I just love to introduce her to people who catch her spirit as well. So over to you, Nahid.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you, everybody, for your time and your patience. And I think the most important thing here for me is to acknowledge the respect that you're giving me by giving me this moment to share something about what I understand to be respect and how I live a life that resonates with my beliefs in respect. And I think I should also maybe introduce myself a little bit more before I go into talking about respect. So my name's Saiyed. I'm in England. I'm in Birmingham, so it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon, coming to the end of my day, and I understand it's the beginning of your day. So lots of respect because you've got the whole of whatever day today is, because I've kind of lost track of what day it is. So you have a whole experience ahead of you of, I think it is Wednesday. So yeah, I used to work at the University of Birmingham before I met up with Safi, and I was introduced to Brad and Mark and Dawud and Mercy and all of you wonderful people today. And as part of my role there, I used to oversee the multi-faith chaplaincy. And what I'll do is I will incorporate a little bit about how I've used the value of respect, both in my personal life and in my professional life, because I found that to be the most rewarding way of engaging with people. Now, I'm not an academic scholar. I'm not a Quranic scholar. I'm not going to be sitting here and quoting verses and referencing chapters. Dr. Safi and Dawood and my other colleagues will be much better placed to do that. So I'm coming to you as a ordinary Muslim who is kind of like just being taught to live, hopefully, a good life and a life that contributes to the happiness and success of others, not just to myself. And so I'll start with a summary of what the Quran teaches me about respect, and that it's an essential value that should be practiced in all aspects of our life, and it's an integral part of Islamic faith. The Quran teaches us to respect God, the importance of respecting and recognizing his authority as a creator and sustainer of the universe. It just teaches me to respect myself. God teaches us that human beings have been created with dignity and honor, and that we should respect ourselves by taking care of our physical health, mental health, and spiritual well-being. Teaches us to respect our parents, and by parents I would also include our elders and people in the community. So anybody of that generation, anybody who might be a parent figure, your aunts, your uncles, your elderly neighbors, I would include in that. It teaches us to respect, and that we need to obey them, we need to honor them, and it's one of our most important duties to do that. It also teaches us respect, and Safi has talked about inclusion and diversity, and everything around race and religion, and any way in which we choose to describe ourselves or identify ourselves or even describe each other. Respect of all of that, we need to show respect, and we need to be kind to each other. We also need to be kind and respectful of nature. God teaches that human beings have been given a responsibility to take care of the environment and of all living beings, and that we should not cause harm or destruction to any part of God's creation. So taking all of that and living it is what I'd like to just share a little bit now. So as I said, I used to work at the University of Birmingham, and one of my roles was to oversee multi-faith chaplaincy. Now that included chaplains from different religious backgrounds. We had Jewish rabbis, we had priests, we had imams, we had Buddhist chaplains, we had Hindu, Sikh, we had a whole range of beautiful people on our campus who were supporting our students in their practice of their religion and helping them as they journeyed through life. And as you probably know, when you're a student, you're growing, you're learning new things, and sometimes that makes you question your own self-belief, what you were taught, how you encouraged to think. And it can be a very difficult time, but our chaplains did an amazing job of supporting our students and being on that journey with them, irrespective of what religion they came from. So we had an open door policy, and whatever student came with, whichever religion they came to believing in, they were given that space, that respect, that dignity to share their story, to be heard, to be validated, to be supported in a way that was meaningful for them. And what that meant was putting aside our own beliefs sometimes and just parking something that we believe in order to show that respect to the person in front. I also one of my greatest challenges, which I'd like to share, is working with those chaplains and the university. Now, the university had a very clear sort of expectation that we needed to have policies, and we needed to have procedures, and we needed to have guidance, and everything needed to be in place in order to safeguard and support our students. And yet our chaplains did not answer to the university. They were not appointed or employed by the university. So there was a real dilemma there as me, as a university employee, a Muslim woman, put into the chaplaincy of people who knew their faith inside out, who could quote scriptures and who could, cause lots of confusion unintentionally. And there was me, and I'm thinking, okay, so I'm never going to be able to, quote the Quran at you, and I'm not going to be able to talk to you about, the Bible or the Torah. But what I can do is I can listen. And what I can do is I can help us to get to that place where we have a mutual goal. And our mutual goal was to support students, to create a safe environment for our students to be able to enjoy living and being at the campus, to be able to access all of the academic teachings, to make friends and to grow. And that was our shared goals, shared sort of understanding that we were both there for students. So when 9/11 happened, for example, and the university and the government went all sort of like a bit crazy and started to throw sort of, demands on us to have policies and procedures, and how are we going to find vulnerable students, and how are we going to report students, and what are we going to do if there's a concern, and all of this was going on. And our chaplains were thinking, but no, we are here to show respect, and that means we will not be reporting our students. And the university is thinking, well, we need to know what's going on in the chaplaincy. So my role was to negotiate, was to mediate, and to bring about some level of understanding where both the university and our chaplains understood that we were looking out for our students, looking out for their best interests. And we kind of, worked through that. And it took us 6 months to a year, where it was just mostly me listening and oftentimes apologizing for sometimes what felt a little bit harsh and a bit aggressive from the university's perspective, but also understanding that the university had a responsibility to its students and to its community. But yeah, as I said, I think, the way we worked through that was by listening and by showing respect, and by me saying to the chaplains, I'm not here to take your places. I respect you for what you know and how you treat our students. But I also have knowledge, and I also have experience, and I also have value to bring to the table. So it's about being confidently assertive, but being respectful. And then working together to say, okay, each of us got different skills and strengths, and how do we bring this together? So that was one area in which we kind of, where I practiced, and I learned a lot more about respect. And I learned more about respect in the sense that it wasn't just about blindly following somebody, and it wasn't just about saying, I'm not going to question, I'm just going to sit back and allow things to happen. It gave me the confidence to ask questions, because respect is that. It's about creating a safe space where people can feel comfortable to ask questions. Any kind of question, because when we ask questions, we learn and we grow. We create that space in which we can see change. And so for me, that's really important, to create safe spaces wherever I go. So I try to be honest. I try to be open. I don't always get it right. I can be grumpy. I can be annoying. I can be frustrating, and I can shout. But I have to manage those characteristics that I have. I have to understand that that's not necessarily going to get me the achievements that I would like to see for all of us. So yeah, respect plays a big role in my life, and I feel like I've maybe rambled on a bit here and gone on all sorts of different directions, but that's what respect is. Respect is about, it's all over the place. It's not in one little pocket. It's not in one space. I practice respect in my family. I have young adult children, and as they were growing up, I needed to treat them with respect, to give them their space to grow and to find their path. I needed to create some spaces for them that was safe and, but also not to dictate to them what I thought was right. I needed to give them the tools and, allow them to learn how to use those tools in life. And one of the things that I have always worked with them on is honesty and respect and trust. It's about being honest, respectful, and trusting of yourself first, of your immediate community, and learning to do that then in every interaction that you have. Now, I don't know if I'm running over time here, or kind of if I'm okay for time, Brad.
You can carry on if you like.
If I like, if I'm not boring you, if I'm
You're
not
boring us. You've come up to the time, but out of respect, I'd want to make space for you to share a bit more because you're on a roll.
So yeah, and this is the thing, is when I'm on a roll, I'm on a roll. So now I need to, so again, this thing about respect. I have to respect Mercy, and I have to respect Dawud and Mark and all of you students there who I'm sure want to hear from each of my other colleagues as well. So I'll be very happy to answer any questions or elaborate on anything that I've said or not said. After my colleagues have had their fair space to talk about respect and what it means for them. So thank you very much.
That was excellent. And in fact, I already am thinking of a question for you for the second hour. So yeah, we'll want to hear more from you. That was wonderful. And especially in the sense of that you really lived this on the ground as a peacemaker. I mean, this is peace building in a tense situation in a public space with multi-faith and government, and so what a practitioner you are. And in fact, one of the words we like at SSU as we've thought about it is as brave space. And thank you for creating and occupying brave space, Nahid. So good.
I think one of the biggest challenges to respect sometimes is the fact that there are numerous priorities and everybody's perspective and everybody's need is critical and essential, and it's just like thinking, okay, slow down, we'll get there.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, let's turn the mic over to Mark Braverman now, and if you just share who you are, what you do in the world, Mark. We're grateful to hear now from the Jewish contingency. Oh, and unmute first, though. There we go.
Thank you very much. Yeah, you can shut me up by hitting the mute button whenever you like. You've got that power. So, but I do have a timer on, and I'll try to stay within. I will stay within the 10-minute time limit because, like Nahid, I'm very excited about getting to the part where we get to have conversation with students. So I'm honored to be in the presence of my colleagues, and I'm honored to meet my new colleagues, and I'm looking forward to the part where we all get to talk together. So just briefly to introduce myself, I'm a Jewish American. I was born in 1948, which was a big year for the Jewish people and very problematic, as I'll make clear as well. And if you were a Jewish kid born into a traditional Jewish home and a traditional Jewish community, in the United States in 1948, the same year as the establishment of the State of Israel, I was raised in a very potent combination of mainstream rabbinical Judaism and political Zionism. And just the short story is that I see this as a huge problem, and in fact, spiritually, politically, and in terms of our faith, a catastrophe for Judaism and for the Jewish people. One which we are struggling to find our way through. It has enormous implications as well for our topic today, which is the idea of mutuality, of peacemaking, how to bring people together, particularly with respect to Jewish-Christian relations, which is my area. But Muslim Christian and Jewish relations as well. I don't know much about Muslim-Christian relations outside of my own experience. My sense is that historically it has had its own complications and challenges, but compared to what happened between the church and Christianity and the Jewish people, it's not so bad. It had some shining moments, which I think we're still striving for in terms of Jewish-Christian relations. So let me just talk about that. And what I'm going to try to do for the first time, you're here for it, is to give the entire history of Jewish-Christian relations in 8 minutes. And I'm doing it to make a point. Let me just say, however, just in terms of Christian-Muslim relations, and I hope we can Jewish-Muslim relations, and I hope we can deal with that later on with the experts in the room. The current quote conflict between Jews, what I mean by that is the state of Israel and Zionism, and Islam. Well, it's not. That's not the conflict. It's not a religious conflict. There's a conflict between two peoples living on one piece of territory, and those who, for their own misguided reasons, want to say that this is a religious conflict. They're doing that for the wrong reasons. They have a political agenda. This is not a religious conflict between Jews and Muslims. For one thing, Palestinians are both Muslim and Christian. They do not equate to Islam. And for another, if you go there, and Mercy is there right now, and some of you may have been there as well, you will see that Jews and Palestinians can get along just fine. The problem is politics. The problem is not Islam and Judaism. Although the problem is Islam and Judaism and Christianity. And that's what I want to get to in terms of my, when I go through this quick history. So the relationship between Jews and Christians, or Judaism and Christianity, or Judaism and the church, began in the 1st century in Palestine, Roman-occupied Palestine, with a conversation, a Jewish conversation that was happening at the time. And it was, I'm oversimplifying this, but it's really true in its essence. The conversation was about whether one worships God on one mountain in a house that you build for God, or whether creation and God's love is for everyone. The conversation was about whether God chooses one family, one tribe, one people as his special people devoted to his worship, or whether, as was made clear on the day of Pentecost, the power of the Spirit is truly in the Spirit, and it is for everyone, and those distinctions between Jew, Gentile, slave, free, male, female, as Paul said, are dissolved. And this is the issue for humankind throughout history up to the present day. And so in the crucible of the 1st century, where we had this conversation between Jews, spearheaded by this charismatic, radical, rabble-rousing, grassroots organizer, Jesus of Nazareth, that conversation is continuing. And we have to confront this for the sake of humanity and for the sake of creation itself. So what does the Bible record? Okay, so this story begins in Luke chapter 4, where Jesus initiates his ministry in a synagogue on the Sabbath in Nazareth. And what happens to him? Okay, he unscrolls the scroll of Isaiah. Jesus was always quoting scripture, and he announces that the message of his ministry and the message for humankind has to be this message about basically social justice. And that this was the whole theme of his ministry for those 3 years until that last week in Jerusalem. What happens to him? the Jews in the synagogue, his fellow Jews in the synagogue, basically decide that he has to die, and they try to kill him and throw him off a cliff. For what? Not for quoting Isaiah. You know, Isaiah was read in the synagogue on a regular basis, because he broke the rules, and he created the unpardonable sin of talking about prophets and people in Syria and in Lebanon, outside of the boundaries of Palestine, outside of the boundaries of us. You see, and Jesus spent his whole ministry dealing with that. He talks to the woman at the well and says, you know, the time will come. She says, why are you talking to me? I'm a Samaritan. And he said, you worship on one mountain and we worship on another. And he, remember what he said, the time will come, woman, when we will not worship on any one mountain, but we will worship in the spirit. He gives the parable of the Good Samaritan, where he asks and answers the question, who is my neighbor? So this is the whole story. Now, fast forward. This band of radical Jews who are breaking all the rules, because of history, go off and start their own institution. They start their own church, ecclesia, their own gathering. And it is a radical experiment in the heart of empire of establishing an alternative community where those boundaries are dissolved. Gentiles basically means, a terrible translation, it basically means taethne, the peoples, everyone, all nations together. And the Jews went off, again, because of history, and went back to their own insularity. And the rabbis in rabbinic Judaism without the temple established something a lot better, but it was still insular, and it was still us and them. And Paul and his crew tried to do something different. And again, fast forward within a couple of centuries, the church had thrown in with empire. It turned its back on the essence of the Gospels and of Jesus himself, and said, we're in charge, we're better, we're exceptional. They threw the Jews, and in due time, the Muslims under the bus, but especially the Jews, and said, the only way to God is me, in a obscene reversal of what Jesus was saying in John chapter 14. And again, fast forward to 1945, oops, 10 minutes already, 1945, when Christendom, Western Christendom, European Christians stood in front of the ovens of Auschwitz and said, what have we done? And that was an opportunity to take a look at ourselves, right? Western civilization saying, we did this. This anti-Semitism, which created this horror, this genocide, was because we saw ourselves as special. But you blew it. And instead, what you did was, well, we have to wash our hands of this shame and this guilt. We're going to give specialness back to the Jews. We're going to honor the land grant that was in that original covenant, even though Jesus said we're done with that. And political Zionism was endorsed, and Christianity, not the heretical, unbiblical, fundamentalist Christianity, was said that in the end times, when the last non-Jew leaves Jerusalem, Jesus will come back the next day. I'm talking about mainstream liberal Christianity, which says, we're so ashamed of what we did that we are going to give you this land back, and say that that original covenant is in place, even though it turns its back on the essence of our faith and of what Jesus said in the New Testament. And so what's happening today, and here's my point. Again, I have nothing to say about Islam in this matter. This is being said by my colleagues. But in terms of the church and of Christians, and Mercy, who's sitting in Bethlehem today, is an embodiment of that mission, is to say, if we are really going to honor and have mutuality and peacemaking with the world, but particularly with our Jewish colleagues, we have to look at you and we have to say, you are sinning. I love you. Stop what you are doing. I understand the basis and the motivation for Zionism. I understand as a Jew where that comes from, that need for safety, but it's not the answer to anti-Semitism. The answer is not to seek safety by doing to them what was done to us. Let's go back and honor that best Jew, that greatest Jewish prophet, who, and I'll end with this, if he were going to come back to Jerusalem, we always talk about what would Jesus say today? Or what's Jesus going to do when he comes back? I know what he's going to do. He's going to stand on the Mount of Olives and he's going to shed a few tears for Jerusalem today and what's happening there, but he's not going to stand there crying for very long. He's going to continue walking down that hill west into West Jerusalem. He's going to stand in front of the Knesset and he's going to say, destroy this temple. Destroy all those temples of greed and exceptionalism and us and them, and embrace that message of that prophet. And there are other prophets as well who we've blessed today. Embrace that prophetic message and say, let that temple be replaced with, in Jesus' terms, my body of Christ, one humanity united in a brotherhood and a sisterhood of compassion and love. And so when we look at Jewish-Christian relations today and the crucible of what's happening in Palestine today between Christians and Buddhists and Muslims and Jews, this is the message that we must bring. And the work in Palestine must be replicated throughout the world between Black and white and North and South. That's my prayer and that's my message.
Wow, thanks so much, Mark. My goodness. I'm in the dilemma between having calling for an altar call or an offering. You know how it goes. That was powerful. I think I've had a paradigm shift in the last.
People often when I get into preaching like this and quoting from scripture, and I'm never quoting from the Old Testament, I'm quoting from the New Testament, people say, well, when did you convert? And I didn't know how to answer that question at the beginning, although I understood where it was coming from. And I said, I'm not quite sure what that would mean, but I wish that things had gone differently in the first century so that I wouldn't be having to answer that question.
Right. Well, thank you so much. And I'm sure we'll have more questions for you in the second hour. We're going to pass it back to our brother Dawud now, and he also has screen share, so he can show us some things as well during this talk. So you're up, Dawud.
Thank you, everybody. And can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, there you go. Okay, I'm going to follow suit and try to stay within the 10 minutes. And actually, part of the reason I did a presentation when it helps clarify my thinking, and also I think it's a change of pace for the people that are listening. And I don't have to say everything because you can read as I'm kind of going along. But we know the topic today, so I won't spend a lot of time on that. My name is Dawud Abdur-Rahman, and our discussion today is how we have experienced and tried to practice mutual respect for building peace-building relationships with those of other faiths. So just in terms of a brief bio about who I am, I like this is one of my favorite photos. I'm from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania originally. I'm married. I have 3 children. I live in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. and Southern Maryland and Charles County, Maryland. I'm a lifelong Eagles fan. And this is one of my favorite pictures because Philadelphia has it's a very diverse city, like a lot of cities in the United States, but it also is distinguished in that it has a very strong Muslim presence and a lot of diversity among the Muslims in Philadelphia. So I'd like to just put that out there just as just kind of one of my favorite newspaper covers that I've kind of saved over the years. In terms of formal training. I'm a business major. I have a Bachelor of Business Administration and a Master of Business Administration, a Master's Certificate in Project Management. I worked for 35 years in the federal government in the United States, working in real estate design and construction, public projects, and working with the private sector to design and construct buildings or lease space. I now own a project management consulting firm. Where I live in Charles County, I'm a Charles County planning commissioner. So planners are people that figure out where things should be or where roads should go, or, kind of develop plans for the orderly development of various communities. And I actually think that's I think of planning as an endeavor that really works in trying to develop processes for the common good. I really see it as a spiritual endeavor. So I see planning that way. I consult with schools. I chair the Chamber of Commerce's here in Charles County, Maryland Business and Education Committee, and I work in school and industry partnerships, and I also do mentoring. I'm an author. I engage in a lot of interfaith activities. I'm really interested in fitness and wellness, and I mentioned I'm a lifelong Eagles fan. Did I say I'm a lifelong Eagles fan? So the next slide is in terms of the areas that I feel like I tried to answer the question that's been presented, the areas that I feel like I engage. I feel like there's 4 areas. And it starts with internal. Your internal engagement as it relates to respect and respecting yourself. And Nahid kind of said the same thing, so I'm kind of channeling her. So you're going to hear some overlap with me and Safi, I believe. I think then it goes to family and friends, family and intimate friends, community and society, and then professional networks. I mean, I could sort of maybe switch some of these around, but in my mind, I thought about those are the 4 areas that I try to think that I engage in mutual respect. I just want to take a pause for a second. This is the month of Ramadan. The Muslims fast from dawn till sunset. And also, we also are supposed to be better people, or actually be the people we're supposed to be all year long with, in terms of patience and kindness and forgiveness and those sorts of things that we're supposed to do. We're supposed to focus on those more often. The fasting is supposed to actually produce a quality in the Quran called taqwa, which is God consciousness. Sometimes it's translated a fear of Allah, but it's a fear that's a reverence of Allah, who, as you all may know, is the Arabic name for the being that necessarily exists by himself. Whether you're a Muslim, Christian, or Jew, or if you're speaking Arabic, you refer to the Almighty as Allah. And so this practice is supposed to produce a higher spiritual state that I believe starts from the inside out. So in terms of the pyramid that I set up, I think I like to just focus on the fact that I believe everyone is in the Quran is created from a single soul. I believe that self-actualization starts with a conscious effort to develop an inner peace and an alignment with Allah that allows respect for others. It's hard to respect other people if you don't respect yourself, or you yourself feel insecure. I think that's why I think it starts with yourself. I think al-Islam, the word al-Islam is translated peace. It comes from the root word that means peace, safety, and security. I believe it's an inside-out endeavor, and the Quran informs us that the remembrance of Allah, remembering Allah and having consciousness of Allah and reading the Quran is where hearts and minds are assured. And there's a quote from the Prophet Muhammad where he said that Allah is self-respecting and a believer is also self-respecting, and the respect of Allah is injured if a believer does what he is forbidden for him to do. So for me, my endeavor or practice of respect starts with my family. My wife is a Christian. I come from a family that is multi-faith. In some cases, it's multi-ethnic, and there are people who marry multi-racially. So I believe that, like the old expression, charity begins at home. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, has said, the best of you are those who are best for your families. It really kind of starts where you are, so once again, the inside out, how you practice what you are doing in your personal sphere, I think it can translate to how you deal with the wider world. And then I shared a couple ayats or verses from the Quran where Allah said that some of his signs is that he created mates for you to live in tranquility with them, and that Allah created family relationships, that I believe that the family of origin is where you begin to learn the principles of respect. And I take a lot of effort to try to be a good husband, the best husband I can be an attentive father, be there for my friends when I can. I don't always succeed, but then I believe that those activities then prepare me for engaging the outside world. In terms of community and society, I tend to engage in community service activities. I'm involved in a business association here where I live, and we also support various charitable activities. The Quran, I think Safi quoted an ayat from the Quran that's similar to this, where Allah makes it very clear that we're supposed to be kind to neighbors and relatives and orphans and people that are not us. There's an entire chapter of the Quran called Ma'un, which is the neighborly needs. And there's a principle in Islamic jurisprudence called maslaha, which means working for the common good. And then I think it goes to professions and networks. I believe that working with integrity, professionalism, and honesty helps to I don't think you can do that without respecting your colleagues, suppliers, employees, people that you're other professionals that you're working with. Mindfulness at work, and I've been in a position of being a consultant, I've been a supervisor, I've been a coworker, but it's being respectful of other people's religious practices and observances and the way you go about your business, to, even though you don't practice those things and may not even agree or understand them, that you acknowledge that someone may be in a different state of mind or need to take off or leave early, for their particular observance. When I was in graduate school, I did my research paper was on spirituality in the workplace, what's the idea of that is that the values that wherever you learn your values, whether it's from traditional religion or some other philosophy, how do you represent those values in the workplace, those same values of honesty, integrity, kindness, patience? How do you do that? That was my research project. I really like the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It was written by an author, if you're not familiar with it, by the name of Stephen Covey. It's been a bestseller, probably internationally, definitely in the United States, and it's referenced by a lot of people. These principles are written. Stephen Covey is a Mormon. I remember reading, and this came up in my research, where he actually said he brought a lot of his Mormon practices and turned it into these principles. But some of those principles were: think win-win, seek first to understand, then be understood, and synergize, work with people, that kind of thing. So I think I talk about this book. I recommend this book. I try to incorporate these practices in the way I do my business. As I mentioned, I believe urban planning, which I do as a planning commissioner, but I've also run planning organizations in the federal government in the United States, is really an endeavor to get everybody's perspective and try to create a mutually respectful and a situation in any environment that you're in. You're considering all factors so that people can live in harmony. The Quran orders justice throughout the Quran. That's an overarching principle in the Quran. And the Prophet Muhammad, as it relates to professions, before the call of prophethood, or being called to the office of prophethood, was a businessman. He was called Al-Amin. His wife was a wealthy businesswoman, and it was because of his integrity that he was she was actually interested in him, and also that integrity followed him into the office of prophethood, which is one of the reasons that people were willing to listen to him about now believing that he was now the final messenger to all mankind. So in summary, and I'm coming up on 9 minutes and 30 seconds here, I'll summarize by saying that some of the overarching principles in the Quran is that all humanity was made from a single soul. The intent in the Quran is to deal justly and fairly with each other, which means to have respect. I don't know how you can deal justly and not have respect for people. Cultural, ethnic, and racial diversity is a part of the measure, the takdir of in the Quran. Let me let this person in. In the Quran, it's part of the design. We're encouraged not to look at our differences as reasons to fight one another, but to get to know one another. Muslims are expected to be fully engaged and to be a justly balanced component of society, and we're urged to cooperate and compete with each other in all good works. I'm not going to, the next slide is the summary of these ayats. I'm not going to read those, but if anybody wants this presentation, I'll share it. So that was a summary of these ayats that I just kind of read, and that's my presentation. And I'm just over 10 minutes. So thank you for the opportunity to present today.
Thank you, Dawud. My goodness. So what an experience about living in mutual respect, even inside of a marriage, and here would be a good challenge. If you don't need a divorce from your Christian wife, why do Christians, Muslims, and Jews need a divorce from each other as movements? You know,
it comes down to respect and communication.
yeah.
It really does. When you boil it all down, you know, and nobody's perfect.
Yeah. Well, at this point in the meeting is where I confess how horrible I feel, because everyone should have had twice as much time for sure. We're not going to rush through though. Here's what we're going to do. Here's the plan. Mercy's going to share. And then before we open it up for questions, I do want to do one more quick round where each of the lecturers could say, I wish I had said this too. So if there's something that you're regretting not having shared, then I do want to make space for you for that, just because we still have like a full hour left, and we will have time for questions, but that's how what my gut says at the moment. So Mercy, you're on. And again, please introduce yourself, what you're doing in the world, where you are, what's up.
Okay, can you guys hear me? Okay, yeah. So my name is Mercy Aiken. I was a student in this very program last year. So hi to everyone. There may be some of you that I even know. I work with an organization called Network of Evangelicals for the Middle East, NEMI, and we are trying to change the conversation in the evangelical world around what is happening in Israel and Palestine and the broader Middle East. So how evangelicals relate, especially conflict here, but also how they relate to and think about Muslims and Jews and even Eastern Christians. These are all very, very important issues, and wish us luck. Some of you probably laughed or maybe even rolled your eyes when I said our lofty goal, but it is our lofty goal, and we feel like somebody's got to do it. So we who come from this movement, we are most responsible to speak into this movement. And I say all that assuming that all of you understand as well as I do that the evangelical movement has caused a lot of problems over here. Okay, so and I'm over in Bethlehem right now. I'm living in Palestine, just down the street from the separation wall. And I have been coming and going from this place for, 7, 8 years now. So this is kind of like my home away from home. It's just I'm always just kind of going back and forth from the United States to here. And by the grace of God, I've been able to develop a lot of wonderful relationships with Palestinian Christians of lots of different denominations, along with a lot of Muslims and a lot of Israeli Jews. And I really, really thank God for the preciousness of all of these relationships and what I've learned from them. Way more than I could possibly begin to express in the few minutes that are allotted to me here. But when I think about our practice and experience of mutual respect, first, I just, in our faith tradition, I want to first just acknowledge that all of our religious faiths are not just like this clean cut and dried thing, like this person is Muslim or this person is Christian or this person is Jewish. There are ethnic, national, and political beliefs that are attached to all of these systems that vary incredibly. And so there is a tremendous amount of diversity. And so when you really begin to say to yourself, how do I live in a space of mutual respect for this humongously broad spectrum, it becomes a bit more complicated. But I think it's very, very important that we wrestle with how to show respect in such a diverse, wide context where there's people that we agree with and people who we strongly disagree with within our own faith and within the other faiths. So living on and off in the West Bank, I do live in the middle of a very toxic stew. I was very grateful, Mark, for the things that you said pertaining to Palestine and Israel. I've had a lot of opportunity to practice this, or I almost want to say I've had a lot of opportunity to allow God to just do something to me and in me that I can't even necessarily explain. Like it's been by the work of his Spirit. When Brad asked me to talk about like some points or whatever, I thought, gosh, Lord, I don't know how to even explain what you've done. I just know that when I was much younger, I had much more of an evangelical view, which would not have allowed me to express much respect for any other faith, even if I wanted to, because the fundamental belief is these guys are wrong and I have to lead them to the Lord, And so how can I respect this other faith? All the way to being an advocate for people who are now like living in the margins, such as Palestinians. How do I do this in a way without being a woke jerk? Also not respecting people of other faiths and points of view. So there's just a lot of tension here, and I'm kind of belaboring this point, but I really want to make it clear that this is a work that we really need to rely on the power of the Holy Spirit, however we may conceive or relate to the Holy Spirit in our faith, and with a whole lot of humility. So first of all, I would just say, and this is obvious, but respect for people of other faiths just starts with being a respectful person in general. Doesn't mean we have to agree with anything that other people are saying or doing, but that we honor their innate worth as a human being, that they are made in the image of God, that they are beloved before God regardless of their actions, and that if they're practicing a faith, they're probably doing it with the sincerest intentions that they have and that they know. And we need to acknowledge that. Also, spending time in a really multi-religious context has helped me kind of almost take like a different view of things, in that I sort of see it now like we're all on this journey to God, and none of us necessarily have all the answers. I consider Christians people who need to convert to Jesus Christ, people who need to follow Jesus Christ just as much as I hope anybody else on earth would. And so I kind of see all of us in the same category. Like we are all like sheep led astray. We are all groping our way with what we know. But God is drawing all of us to himself. God loves all of us, and he's calling all of us so we can respectfully and humbly help each other walk that way. I remember the first time I came to Jerusalem, and I would just look around at all these people in these exquisite religious costumes across the Abrahamic spectrum. I mean, so many different types of costumes. And sometimes you couldn't even tell what religion they were, because some costumes look very, very similar in all three religions. And I just thought, this is like a giant umbrella of cults. Forgive me, and I include all Christians in that. Like we're all just a bunch of cults gathered under this umbrella with Abraham, like all these little factions under this umbrella of Abraham. But God has mercy on all of us. Abraham loved, we have people on the other side. We have God who sees us and has mercy on all of us. So, I've had people even ask me, like, as a Christian, do Christians and Muslims worship the same God? Allah is not the same God as our God. And I think to myself, how can anyone even answer that? I don't know if the person sitting next to me on the pew worships the same God that I do, because we all have these different ways that we have interacted with him in our life, and viewpoints that we've had of him that may have evolved and even changed through the years. So again, questions like that are just kind of like moot points. So I approached my brothers and sisters in the Abrahamic faith as like extended family. I truly see all of us as like cousins in some way, maybe second or third cousins or whatever, but we are all related. We are all from this same original faith of Abraham, who we look to as our father. So these are some ways that I try to, as a Christian, relate to Muslims and Jews. I try to relate to them just as I would some of my fellow Christians. So with humility, a verse that comes to mind: confess your sins to one another, pray for each other so that you might be healed. James 5:16. This is something I try to practice with Muslims and Jews. If I realize that I've said something that has been unnecessarily offensive, or if I came across in pride or arrogance and I realized it later, I'm obliged to apologize to them and to confess my sin to them and ask them to forgive me. And I believe that's a way of showing respect. This extends to learning about and acknowledging how my faith has hurt them, both of them. And that requires a lot of listening. And I have found over here in the Middle East, for example, Eastern Christians, Muslims, and Jews are still, in a way, traumatized by the Crusades and the crusading impulse of Western Christianity today, which is felt in the Middle East. And so these are things that come up a lot that I have to be willing to just listen to. I don't want to be defensive. I don't want to try to prove anything. I don't want to take any type of posture except humility. So I'm not here to defend anyone's actions. I'm here to ask forgiveness. Another point of building a respectful relationship: do not judge, Jesus said, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. With the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Matthew 7:2. Or treat others the way that you want to be treated. And these are just simple things, but I think about it a lot. Like, if we Christians hate it and we feel sabotaged, when we feel that we are judged by only the worst historical examples of our faith, why would we do that to Muslims or anyone else? If we feel that we are being reduced to a negative caricature of our faith, why then would we spout negative caricatures of any other faith? If we want people to give us the benefit of the doubt and assume our sincerity and best intentions, then we need to do the same for them. So, it's just very simple and it's very obvious, but it's just rampant in the Western church that we don't do this. There's levels of judgment that I just find shocking, that people are just blind to seeing. So again, just continually putting yourself in this position. However I'm judging, it is going to come back to me. So how do I want to judge? Celebrate things that we have in common. Walk in unity in those areas. Wherever I do find things that I agree with someone from another faith, I acknowledge it and we celebrate it. Like, we may disagree on all these other things, but we do agree on this. This is awesome. And if there's local or global issues, especially like here in Israel, Palestine, that we can agree on and work together on, yallah, let's do it. Also speak well of people of other faith. Speak well of them where you can, in front of their face and behind their back. Defend them. Praise them where you can in front of the people of your own faith. Let them know that there's incredible people that are out there. And if you don't know any personally, get to know some, because you'll find out there's incredible people. Another thing that I have found, it seems maybe like mutual respect, but when I'm with people of other faith, especially I do this with Jews lately, but we might bemoan the similar challenges that we see in our religions. We might be frustrated by similar trends that we see of violence or fundamentalism or fear. So we can, instead of me saying, oh, how horrible what you Jews are doing over here, I'm like, oh, that's horrible with us too. Oh, we've been worse than you, oh no, we're horrible too. Oh God, help us. And then we can just pray together about it, Let's see what else I have here on my list. I'm trying not to take up too much time here. And this is something, now I'll get a little bit more specific with Israel and Palestine, but for my Muslim friends, and my Christian friends over here, it's very important because I'm living on the West Bank and I'm seeing firsthand every single day all kinds of injustice and oppression. And it would be very disrespectful to be here and it wouldn't be love. I mean, there would be no reason for me to be here if I don't speak out about that. And if I don't let others know. So I have to show solidarity and I have to be an advocate, wherever I can. And then, but then that raises the second conundrum, which Mark sort of addressed, which is, well, then where does that put me with Israelis? Because I'm not here to be, an enemy to any one of these people. God forbid. I do not want to live in that posture. So if you have to talk about an ugly thing, as I do, seeing it firsthand, I try to do it in a way as carefully as possible that does not dehumanize Israelis, that acknowledges, my part of culpability, the part of my people of culpability in this whole situation, that recognizes the reasons why they may be doing that. And then if people, like I share a lot on social media, people come in the comments and want to use dehumanizing language against Israelis or Jews, I'll come in and rebuke them for it. Cut it out. Like, that is not what this is about. We're not just trying to scapegoat them, in our defense of Muslims. We are trying to actually create peace here, and we're trying to repent, for all of our wrongs that we've done. So in that same frame of mind, I also have to hold people within my own faith to account when I hear them expressing dehumanizing ideas of Jews or Muslims. And sometimes that's in their theology too. So it's not that you can just snappily hold them to account, but you have to find ways to also create respectful and honoring, but conversations that are honest and challenging. So those are some of the ways that I have found to make it work for me living over here, trying very hard to keep one foot on this side of the wall, one foot on the other side of the wall, extend a hand of friendship and solidarity every place I can, speak beauty that I see in Islam, beauty that I see in Judaism, wherever I see it, speak the truth, just simply to speak the truth in love, relying with great passion into the mercy of God, for God to help me do this. And I think that's what we really all need to do. Like, we can't do any of this apart from a place of real humility. And maybe I'll just close with this story, but I wasn't planning to say this, but it's just coming to my mind, so I'll say it. Before I came over here for the first time, and I was getting ready to put in the application for Bethlehem Bible College to come over here and volunteer. And I began to fill out the application, and suddenly I just felt like the Holy Spirit surrounded me. And I felt like within my soul, like I could almost see myself, like I shrunk down to something so tiny, like a tiny little mote of dust. And I felt myself almost just like lifted up, like this little mote of dust suspended in this ray of light. And I felt so light and so free. Like, I didn't know how freeing it would be to be that small and to be that nothing, almost invisible. And I realized that this, in a way, this must be how Jesus felt. This tininess that also simultaneously felt completely expansive, like it could fill everything and it could be nothing at the same time. It's so freeing. And I would say, for us to come into that place more and more, ask God to lift us up into that place of smallness, of tininess, captured up in his light, not in a place that we know everything or that we're so wise, but that we're here in tininess, to let him do whatever he would do through us. So I'll stop with that.
Thank you so much, Mercy. So now I need to adjust my plan based on time. So I had said all of our speakers will get a chance to say the thing they didn't get to say yet, but I'll ask you to do that inside of a question. So if, like, Kiana has a question, you can answer her question and then say, oh, and by the way, I also wanted to say, it may help us then if the students address because if one student asks a question and all of us answer, then we're in trouble. So I'll ask students maybe to address your question to one of the one of the speakers, and we'll move from there. And in fact, I'm going to go with just who I see on the screen. And so I apologize for putting you on the spot right away. But Trish, do you have a question for any of the speakers? And then I'm going to ask David A. after that.
I'm going to ask Mercy, just can you give us a concrete example of something that you are doing that you're having success with in changing the conversation about with evangelicals about what is going on over there?
That's a great question. I post a lot on social media. And so I do have a lot of evangelicals that are following me. I don't know how else to measure this except by what I see from like Facebook, but I have found that when I am most in this place of just posting from love, you know, with humility, I have a bit more courage and boldness to also speak truth about what's happening here, because I know in my heart I'm not doing it with any type of hatred towards anybody. And I think that somehow that comes across, because every time I've come here, been at least, you know, several people that I've talked to privately who may have written me and said, love you in the Lord, sis, but disagree with your politics, who by the time I leave, like that time of being in Israel, Palestine, they are advocating for Palestinian freedom and liberation. They've been convinced by seeing the personal stories. There's one following me right now. I'm like, wow, this is interesting. This is a woman who's always posting, I stand with Israel until the end. And like really very, very dogmatically like Christian Zionist type of rhetoric on her page. And she's following me and she's like commenting positively on lots of social issues that I'm writing about Palestinians and so I'm like, huh, Lord, you know, so little by little, yes. Also bringing people over here on tours, which is something else I do, which is a much more, I think, effective way because people can see it with their own eyes. So yeah, those are.
How about Jesus at the checkpoint, Mercy?
Christ at the checkpoint, yeah.
Yeah, Christ at the Checkpoint is it's a biannual conference established by Palestinian Christians. The next one will be next May, about a year and a few months from now. So if any of you want to come to that, if you'd be interested in that, let me know, because we are going to be putting together a little delegation with NIMI. And there's other ways that you can also come over and attend the conference and learn more about the issues on the ground.
That's great. David, do you have a question? And then we'll ask Amy after you. Oh, you're still on mute. Still on mute. I'm going to hit ask to unmute and see if that helps. There you go.
First, I want to say this was amazing, just amazing. And to see the respect, the mutual respect is just, it's so moving. And it had me think, you know, here I am in the US and it can feel like everything. Well, here we have Christians killing Christians every day. I mean, it's just, it's unreal what's happening in the US. But with the press and the political establishment and the conservative religious conversation that's going on, how do we approach this? I mean, this is a great way to do it, obviously, but how do you approach this? And because it seems that the hearts of people really have to change, and how you see another person. And I mean, I just moved to Florida, and it's there's no dialogue here. I mean, there's just none, except what you see on the television, and within the church communities that are local. I mean, it's everybody in their little bubble, and I mean, it's amazing to hear, especially the quotes from the Quran, and you just see the relation and the basis of respect and mutual respect, and the seeing of relations, and then, you know, all these perspectives, and what do we do to change how we see each other on the community level, I guess is the thing, in a place like this.
Who'd like to address that?
Oh, I didn't
Safi.
say who, did I?
Safi's hand is up. Let's go with him.
Well, first of all, I appreciate very much your question, David. I wish I know how to answer this question other than saying I have a bridge built already toward you. We can talk anytime you want, on the telephone, on Zoom, on Facebook. I'm on Facebook every day, posting new things about Islam and Muslim and the way I see my neighbors, whether they're Christian, Jews, or people with no religion. I've been doing this for like since Facebook was established. And I know there are many evangelicals who were following me, but not saying anything to see, is this guy saying one thing today and he's going to say another thing when he's talking to his own people? Well, I got news for them. I'm always the same, because what I believe in is the same, never changed, you know. I believe that there is one creator to this universe, and he created you and created me. And in order to show respect to him, we should love each other. That's very simple. And it can all be answered with the two great commandments that Jesus answered when he was asked by somebody. The great commandment is to love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and all your strength. And second one like it is to love your neighbor like yourself. This is in the gospel. Actually, I believe that Jesus himself was the gospel. So every word he uttered in my mind is gospel. And I believe in his teachings. I believe in what he says, and I try to live accordingly. Same thing goes for what the Quran teach me and what Prophet Muhammad taught me practically with his application of the Quran. There's no contradiction there. The contradiction is in the head of those who wants to create contradictions. I can get along with a practicing Christian or a practicing Jew the same way I can get along with a practicing Muslim, because they're practicing the same thing. They're practicing loving God and loving neighbor. You know, I mean, it's no, don't need to be a rocket scientist to figure it out. So, you know, very simple. The simpler you make it, the better. And I like simplicity.
Okay, thanks.
You're on mute. You're on mute, Brad. You said something, but you were on mute.
Yeah, I'm passing it over to Mark now.
No, he was Brad was unmuting me, because I want to weigh in on this as well. Thank you for that, because you're asking a really good, important question, David. And I go back to some to Mercy's work with evangelicals and talking about evangelicals. It's a weird term because it's really broad. You've got so many different kinds of people. And when I first started working in this area, and working with Christians and working with churches, I found that I felt in some ways a lot more access and a lot more openness and a lot more ability to share with the evangelicals that I met, rather than kind of the tall steeple Protestants in the United States. Because the ones that I met through this network. At the time it was called Evangelicals for Middle East Understanding. These are evangelicals, Christians in the United States, raised in the same background as you, Mercy, who had, because they were involved in mission work and were getting around and seeing the rest of the world, were outside of, to use your word, David, our bubble in the United States. I mean, that's what's wrong with us. We haven't been outside of our bubble. And so we don't understand what humanity is really about. We don't understand any other perspective. So the Christians that I met who had been to Palestine or Vietnam or Afghanistan or Colombia, for that matter, understood what the gospel was really about. It wasn't about saving souls and bringing them into the one true faith, right? It's something completely different. The one true faith meaning the connection with all of with what it means to be human. So when you are, say, for example, a Christian raised on, quote, the Bible and the covenants and Genesis 12 and, you know, the promise of the land and all of that stuff, you have a very distorted picture of the Holy Land and the role of the land in what it means to be a faithful person. And you have this idea that the Jews who were God's chosen, and this is pure Christian Zionism, which is colonialism, which is heresy, which is crack, right? When African Americans, for example, visit the Holy Land, or white Christians who have been raised in this kind of theology and hermeneutic, they go and see that what they learned was upside down. The Jews are not the victims. The Jews are not the heroes of the story today. The victims, the poor and the oppressed the captives who need to be set free, are the Palestinians who are being victimized ironically and tragically by the Jewish people. And this is upside down. And I've spoken with South Africans, Black South Africans, who, when they go to visit Israel, they say, oh my God, this apartheid is worse than the apartheid that we experienced. And we have to reread our Bibles because they were raised in the same hermeneutic of Christian Zion hermeneutic. And they say, we have to reread our Bibles because it's Palestinians who were on the cross today, not the Jewish people who were victimized throughout history. So it opens you up. And it means you have to go back and question what you had been taught. And you have to go back and reread your Bible and understand more what it means. And again, I'll just stop with this. One thing that's happened to the quote interfaith conversation between Jews and Christians is it's been hijacked by Zionism. And it's been in the service of Christians, basically, again, in this misguided, understandable attempt to reconcile with the Jewish people, to do exactly the wrong thing, which is to invest them with the exceptionalism that Christians want to hold on to, and to say, yes, you are special. Nobody is special. Nobody's chosen. All are special. All are chosen. And what we need to do is understand that the Old Testament was the basis and the springboard for the original covenant and the original promise. And it did transform itself, and it was something new. And in the current interfaith rules, you're not supposed to say that, because that's replacement theology, that's supersessionism, that leads to anti-Semitism. And yes, supersessionism was bad. It's not biblical. You know, nobody came to replace anybody else. Jesus came to fulfill what was already there and what the prophets were already saying, but he took it one step further, and it needed to take that other step. And that bothers people who wanted to stay with the old deal, which is that we are special. That's always the struggle. That's always the struggle. So we've got one Bible, we've got one set of scriptures that includes now the Quran, which was a continuation. And we absolutely have to see it that way. And frankly, it doesn't seem to be human nature. So we really need to struggle with that. Get out of our bubble. That's the best thing to do. So I would say to evangelical Christians, don't bother going to the prayer breakfast anymore. Go to Christ at the checkpoint. Get out of your prayer for breakfast bubble and get out into the world. Meet the Palestinian Christians, because they will introduce you to the rest of humanity.
Thanks, Mark. Nahid, did you want to jump in at this point?
Yeah. I think what I was going to say is perhaps, David, you asked about how do you do this and how do we learn and how do we kind of share this? So I think in a practical way, I mean, I completely agree with everything that everybody's saying here about, you know, getting to know people. Really, I'd say it's quite simply, it's about nurturing your curiosity. Yeah, that's really important. It's allow yourself to be curious, ask those questions, get involved, go sit with somebody who's different. And I think at the chaplaincy, what we would do at the university was we would have these sessions called Mythbusters. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but you know, every semester, every term, we'd get a group of students from different faith communities who would just, you know, bring some food, because food's always good, and sit and allow and give other people the opportunity to ask questions that are kind of just in your head about, so why do you do that? Why do you wear that? Why do you fast? Do you not? How does that help your well-being? Anything that's in your mind. I really encourage questioning, and I really encourage people to nurture their curiosity. And for us, those of us who've got this sort of the ability to create those spaces, I would say, do what Brad's just done. Get a group of people. Zoom. I mean, one of the good things that's come out of the pandemic is how we use technology, right? So let's make it work for us. Get those little groups together and talk. It's pretty simple, really. It's talk. I mean, I grew up as a minority person throughout my life. I'm an Indian Muslim woman, grew up in England, born in England, went to school where a handful of Muslim Indian students, and we grew up saying the prayers. We would sing hymns in the morning, and we would go home and talk about Jesus and Christianity. And my parents like thinking, yeah, maybe I need to teach you about Islam, right? But that was fun. That was okay. I grew up in that space. Everything about me is a minority individual, even within the Muslim communities, right? There are, whether we like it or not, we look at different people from different parts of the world, and we do judge. We should not judge. But if you're an Indian Muslim, what are you like? If you're an American Muslim, what are you like? You're a Black Muslim, what are you like? Who is a real Muslim? So I think for me, it's always about challenging people, but doing it respectfully. And it's also about being that role model, living the life that I would want people to view me for. What does my religion say? So it's really about living it. And as I said at the very beginning, I can't quote scriptures, I can't quote those verses, but they're all there. Everything is there. It's just about how we live it.
Thank you, Nahid. That was just excellent. Amy, do you have a question? And then Latasha then?
I'm Amy. I'm in the Southwest United States. I keep paying attention to what's being said, so I haven't had time to fully form my question. But what occurs to me is this has been a great 2 semesters. This has been a great program. And I grew up in a similar background as Mercy. And I think what this program has showed me is the scope of the problem of peacemaking, or not the problem of peacemaking, but how big it is, the job of peacemaking, and then how much undoing I have to do of my own thinking to be able to get there. And I think that's what I've decided or come to, is that I have to start with me. And we had an inner transformation class, and we did we did a 3-week prayer. We had to write a prayer rule. And I just noticed a huge difference when I was doing the contemplative practices. And so did my husband, which kind of clues me into the scale of what he deals with on a regular basis. But I'm just wondering, I'm not quite into in my mind, you have all arrived, all the speakers kind of in the interfaith relationships. And I'm not there yet, just because, anyway, where I'm at. But I'm wondering, what role does contemplative practices or inner work have in your lives in order to do the work that you do, or because you're doing these very active things to, build bridges? I guess I'm just wondering what the role is, because Safi, you talked about ego, and Naeed, you said sometimes you do it and you miss the mark. I'm just wondering, and Dawud, you said that, it starts with self-respect. So I think that's my question, is kind of what role does that inner work have, or how big is that in your life?
I should just say this, Safi, before we go on. Those who need to leave at the end of 2 hours are very much free to do that. Because of time constraints, we will we're going to go over time for those who can stay if students have questions. So I just want to mention that. But we've said that there'd be a 2-hour break for those who need to be released. Okay, back to you, Safi.
Amy, thank you for the question. I usually, especially during this month of Ramadan, which is something we didn't talk about in this session, but we Muslim are going through a 30 days of fasting. We are, I think, in the 21st day today. I usually put on Facebook a 2.5-minute thought or idea. During this Ramadan, most of my thoughts were based on this principle I mentioned, but I did not expand on, called tazkiyah. Tazkiyah is how to enhance myself every day on daily basis to become the best version that God created when he created me. I want to fulfill God's will by being the best I can be. So in order to do this, and this is again in Arabic called tazkiyah, in order to do this, I have to exercise spiritual exercises. I have to prevent myself from fulfilling all my selfishness desires. Like if I'm fasting now, when I sit to eat, I shouldn't eat all the food I can eat. I should eat only what keeps me going. And this is like controlling my desire to eat. I try to lower my gaze when I see a beautiful woman crossing the street in front of me. I'll try to be nice to those who are trying to be belligerent. If I see my neighbor and he didn't say good morning, nothing's wrong with me starting and saying good morning to my neighbor. These things all have to do with how to tame my own selfishness and try to be in control of who I am. And this is a major part of the spiritual training that a Muslim should be going through every day for the rest of his life, not just during this month. It's just that Ramadan, this month, is a great training ground for everyone to do their best in training themselves. So yes, training is very important. Trying to curb my selfishness is very important. Trying to tame myself is very important. I don't know if I answered your question. Is this what you wanted me to talk about? Is this it?
Yeah, and you bring up an important point that it's not just those inner, like during prayer time, it's living it out. It's a whole comprehensive, yeah.
Absolutely. Above all, it's living it out. Actually, let me mention something if I still have the ground here. I think I still have it. Basically, prayer is not an end in itself in Islam. Prayer is a step to lead to a higher step, which is God consciousness. God consciousness is very important. It means that I am always aware that I am walking with God. God is there. If I cannot see him, he can see me, which is a famous saying. God is always with me. If each one of us feel that he's always walking with God, we will be much better human being in our dealing with other living creatures, with earth itself, with the trees, with the birds, and with other human beings, of course.
Thanks, Safi. Oh, go ahead, Naheed. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think I completely agree with what Safi is saying. And Amy, as you said, I think it does start from yourself. And it's not just what's visible. It's that conversation that I know I have with myself regularly, and I question myself and I ask myself if I'm doing this right, if this could be done better. I ask myself when I get upset why I've reacted to certain things. And one of the things that I need to keep reminding myself to do is to check my ego, because it's my ego that kind of like just gets in the way. And it's, you know, all these voices and noises, and it's all of this, you know, I'm hurt, I'm offended, how dare they say that, how dare they do that, how did that person not even say good morning to me? Instead of saying, you know what, that person's on their own journey. I don't know what happened before they left their house. I don't know what they're going back to this evening. I don't know, you know, what their life is about. So why am I so consumed about how dare that person say this, that, or the other? You know, it's not about me. It's about everybody. And for me, my journey is just simply to be true to myself and true to Allah. You know, be the best version of the person that He created me to be. And so there is a lot of meditation. There's a lot of mindfulness. And that's a very trendy thing right now, right? Mindfulness. Everything's about mindfulness, right? But it's essentially what it is. And Islam teaches us to be mindful about, you know, our thoughts, our behaviors, our actions, our interactions. And so for me, that's really essential. And it does take a lot of work. It does. And I sometimes like spook myself and I'm like, how did I do that? I mean, you know, because I know that was Allah. That was not me, because I didn't have that grace. I didn't have that knowledge. How did I come about? How did I become an assistant director of student services? Me, yeah, Allah. And that's praise, and that's kind of respectful. But it's also about valuing that everybody else has contributed to making me who I am. And I'm fortunate to have been around some very, very good people.
Well, I hope you'll write that up, Nahid. That's a good blog right there. It's such a good summary. Now I know Nahid's going to need to go fairly soon. Before Latasha asks her question, I'm going to ask Andrew to step in now, and so he can give some concluding thanks and remarks. Then we'll come back to questions for those who can stay.
Yeah, I did want to thank everyone. I mean, this was amazing to hear from each of you. Nahid, what you were saying about mindfulness, I see Mark added his vote to mindfulness as well. We teach that in the inner transformation of a peacemaker. In the Orthodox tradition, we have nepsis, which is watchfulness, attentiveness, requiring Hezekiah or stillness and quietude. So it's like the conditions of stillness in order to be attentive, to be watchful, and so we include that as well. You know, as all of you were talking, I wrote down some points. So I just wanted to kind of go through this. This is, I mean, some of these could be summaries, but more they're kind of just points that stood out to me that I found to be helpful from some of the things that you were saying. And as I look at what I wrote, you know, for each of the 5 speakers, these could almost be 5 chapters of a book on multi-faith engagement. So I'm just gonna, you know, some of this I'll just read, but I'll riff off of it as well. But again, this is kind of my summary, my takeaway from what everybody was saying. And so for Safi, what I heard really, and I know you like simplicity and, you know, keeping it simple, that sort of thing. So, I mean, the emphasis is always on God or the perspective of God, if I could be so bold to say that. So for example, human dignity is not just because of the inherent worth or value of a created human being, but more so because God bestows this dignity on humans. So if we love God, we must love what and who God loves. That was my takeaway from what you were saying. I got a thumbs up there. So Nahid, interestingly, I mean, I picked this up even before you were talking about this a couple responses ago, but I wrote down, our differences are an invitation for curiosity. So we're all different, right? The differences are an invitation for curiosity rather than a justification for a sense of superiority. That is, because we are different, the curiosity that we can cultivate about these differences can help us forge relationships which are crucial for just peacemaking, right? There's that sense of difference, curiosity, the invitation for curiosity, which forges relationships among all of us. And so that kind of stood out to me. Mark, you know, listening to you solidarity was kind of the word that came to mind over and over again. There is a need to cultivate solidarity with those who have experienced the suffering that we've experienced, rather than use our past suffering as a justification for preventing that suffering from happening to us again by all means, including the use of violence. So if we've suffered in the past, use that as an impetus for solidarity with those who are suffering today as well, right? Rather than the opposite, which is often the case. Dawud, I talked about inner transformation of a peacemaker. I saw that all over in your talk as well. Our peaceful interactions with others who are different than us starts with our inner transformation, so that harmony and just relationships with others are forged intuitively to the extent that we've been transformed and have cultivated and internalized divine values of patience and humility and self-control and so on. And so that was a big point that stood out to me. And with Mercy, the thing that stood out to me the most was that faith is ultimately a struggle that we're all engaged in. It's a struggle that we're all engaged in. And God knows this, and he understands this. And because of this mutual struggle that we all share, God's judgment is, and it almost has to be, mercy on all. And so that really stood out to me. Another thing that you said that was interesting, because we get these questions from our students a lot about how to engage in these challenging, almost anxiety-ridden conversations with others of different faiths than our own. And I think often that question comes from a place of kind of envisioning us in the heat of an argument, where we're, they're throwing things at us and we need to, have these rebuttals ready for them and that sort of thing. So Mercy, something that you said about speaking good of others and others' faiths behind their backs, I think that stood out to me in the way of kind of recognizing places and instances when we can speak good of other people and other faiths outside of the kind of high temperature controversial arguments, right? It's easier for us to just say something good about our Muslim friends and our Jewish friends and anybody from any other faith backgrounds, and you're planting the same seed as you would if you were in the heat of an argument, maybe even better, or at least planted in better soil than otherwise would be the case if it was, again, in the heat of an argument. So those are some things that kind of stood out to me. And so I have nothing but gratitude to all of you for allowing me to draw those points out and to learn from you. And so thank you on behalf of my students as well. That was really great to hear from all of you.
Thank you, Andrew. And I know that some of our speakers do have a hard stop at the top of the hour. So I just want to again say thank you to all of you, to Mark, to Dawud, to Safi, Nahid, who else did I miss? Mercy, that you would join us today was just, I feel like it may be a game changer for some of us. And so
Brad, can I add something, a comment on what Andrew just said?
Sure. So officially, people can begin to drift out at the top of the hour or whenever you have to go if you're a speaker. But over to you, Safi, and then Latasha has a question.
Andrew, actually, what we're doing this time is fantastic. I mean, you've been inviting me to come and speak to students for several years now. Mm-hmm. And I think this is a step forward, including several speakers and including the students. What I can see for the future is not only that speakers are coming to speak to each other, but also students are participating with the same way. In other words, I really would like for the student to be participant in this and present their own ideas about how peace can be achieved, about how respect can be achieved, all of this. I think real training for the students, and I care about them as if they were my own students or my own brothers and sisters. it'll be very effective if they participate, if we empower them, if we help them have their own voice into this. Thank you. That's all I wanted to say.
Agree.
Mark, and then Kiana has her hand up.
Okay, yes, and before we do break up, there were two things I wanted to say quickly. One is just to throw this out for consideration, not today, but to contemplate on. I have a reaction to the term Abrahamic because if we think about the three traditions that represent, there are like some other folks in the world who would identify as such and who we would not identify as such. And so I kind of have a reaction to the term. I wish we could find another one because it's exclusivistic. It really is. And
I second that motion.
Okay, thank you, Safi. Great.
Definitely.
Again, you have to take my context into consideration in terms of what happened to Christian-Jewish relations after World War II. But I also have a little bit of a knee-jerk response to the word interfaith, because for me, in my context, interfaith conversations were always basically Christians coming in humility to kiss the Jews' ring and say, what can we do to make this up for you? And it's not going in the direction, in my opinion. So I tend to, I don't use either terms. There's lots of other ways to express that. I also wanted to respond. I think it must have been, yes, of course, it was you, Mercy, who talked about relating to Jewish Israelis. And I was very moved by what you said about that. Because, I mean, these are my people, and I feel so much sadness and compassion for them. To me, they're the prisoners of that wall, not the Palestinians. The wall is meant to steal land from the Palestinians, but it's not stolen from the Palestinians. Their souls are their sense of who they are. And the Jews in Israel who live behind that wall, it's pretty horrible what has happened to them. I didn't know you experienced that. And so the idea is reaching out and creating those ties with the people who know that, who are trying to save their country. And so many are leaving because they just don't want to bring up their kids in an apartheid state. And so, to me, what will be the salvation of my people at this point, because we really need help, is to change our narrative. I think you mentioned that as well. We need to understand that our story today is not what happened to us, but what we are now doing to other people. And that's a human condition. And, you know, the Palestinians, if they were empowered, just like the Christians when they were empowered by Rome, if the Palestinians would be empowered, they might turn around and do the same thing and be in the same dilemma. It's a human story. So again, coming back to Jesus, you know, he said, you have to love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you. I had an experience with my son is a Buddhist, and we went to Nepal, and I had an audience with a teacher. You know, and it was the whole deal. The guy, he was sitting there cross-legged in white robes, that he was a teacher. It's like, wow, you get to ask one question. And I said to him, help me, because I feel such sadness and anger at my people because they are sinning very badly. What should I do? And he said, pray for them. So, you know, out of the words of some Buddhist teacher, Jesus is speaking very clearly. And so the prophet, peace be upon him, which something.
Thank you, Mark.
Amen. Can I speak real quick?
Yes.
Just briefly, but I think I'm probably quite guilty of using the term Abrahamic a bit. And I just want to clarify that it was because we were in the context of just these three faiths represented in the discussion here as a way to, you know, acknowledge that.
Yeah.
I wouldn't just use it, obviously, in other contexts. But the pain that you feel, gosh, there's a whole lot that I could say to that. I mean, I feel a lot of that same pain when I look at Christian Zionists.
Yeah, sure.
huge role
You went digital on us, Mercy.
I have to say that in some ways I totally see what you're saying. Like when you first come over here and with the past.
Oh, we lost her. Okay, so we had Latasha on deck, and then Kiana put her hand up. So who's gonna go first? Okay, Latasha.
Okay, I was gonna say if Kiana has to go, she's welcome to go first. Kiana, are you okay to stay, or do you want to go first?
You're good.
Okay, perfect. So my question is for Mark, because I've already asked this question to Brad and Safi, but something you said piqued my interest again in this. You mentioned that there's been a reversal of what Jesus said in John 14 about I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. So I'm curious about that, about how you interpret that and what you mean by this reversal. So if you can expand a bit on that, I'd love to hear it. And then maybe if there's time, if you want to touch on how you respond when people ask, why did you convert? And what you say to that, if you think you have converted or not, or yeah.
Okay, so very briefly, read Brian McLaren on John 14, because he's the one who rocked my world about that. But I mean, I think he's not the only one who's come up with this. I mean, if you go, but he does a brilliant job. I'm trying to remember which book, but Brian is wonderful on this. He talks about the various moves in the conversation with Peter, and basically, so what Jesus was saying, and it's so clear. I don't know what the question could be. What Jesus was saying is not that you have to, quote, believe in me as God or the Savior or all of that false Christology. What he was saying was, if you want to understand, come to the Father, then look at me, be like me, follow my example, do what I've done. That's all there is to it. You know, in the last chapter of Luke, when Jesus comes back and reappears to his disciples who still didn't understand what his ministry was about, still didn't understand what the resurrection was about. And he said, and they don't recognize him. He says, you want to see who I really am? Look at these wounds. Look at how I've suffered. I represent humanity. And by the way, I'm hungry. Can you give me something to eat? Okay? Do you get it now? So that's how we need to understand it. And of course, it was completely distorted for the purposes of the church to say, we're in charge. You know, we want to have control over all of you. Don't read the Bible. Don't translate it into the vernacular. Do not read the Bible. We'll tell you what it says. We'll tell you what it means. So that's the problem with John 14. As far as converting is concerned, again, I came up with that answer, which was, I don't know how else to say it. There was the parting of the ways between the followers of Jesus, the Jews who followed him, and he was basically expressing what Torah was really about. But in order to do that, he had to confront the powers and the principalities, which included the Jews who were thrown in with Rome and who were working for Rome, the kings, the priests, the Pharisees, all of those people who were not representing what Judaism and what the Torah was really, really about. But it was bold because that was the institution. That was the church of his day. They got to say. Right? And so that split had to occur. And they had to go off and say, we have to try something new. That was Paul. Wow. And especially Stephen. I mean, go to Acts chapter 5 and go back to Stephen's speech. Now remember, what happened to Stephen was what they wanted to do to Jesus. They killed him for what he said in that speech. And what was he saying? He was saying, you have to basically move on from the message of the Old Testament, which is, and you're not supposed to say this, which was tribal, exclusivistic, rule-bound, you know? And that's what the prophets were trying to say. But they never went far enough. They never said, if we're really going to follow God, we've got to move on from this temple business. You know, and that'll get you killed. So we all have to convert. Right now, I had to convert from the Jewish exclusivism that I was brought up in. You know, we are better because we suffered. We have to protect ourselves because all who are out there want to kill us. I understand that. That's a tragedy of history, but it is not the way. Right? So the way has to be the way. It can't be the Christian way, the Muslim way, the Buddhist way, the Jewish way. The way is the way. So conversion, the whole idea of conversion, and believe me, growing up, you know, I couldn't even step into a church. I had to cross the street and not walk on the same side of the street as the church, because the church meant death, destruction, and even worse, conversion. I couldn't go in there because they might try to convert me or they would kill me. And it was clear which it was worse to be converted even. So that whole concept of conversion was tainted for me, the worst thing in the world. And again, that's history. But I think the idea of conversion also, I mean, I think also of, you know, going back to the Gospels and John saying, you know, meant for the day, you know, repent. It's a bad translation. The Greek is metanoia. Change yourself. Change your mind. Meditate. Become mindful. And that's the way. So conversion is a kind of a destructively meaningful concept to me, either for that reason.
Thanks, Mark. And I put a link to one of Brian McLaren's responses to John 14:6.
Great.
So, Kiana?
Hi. So I have a bit of a chaotic question. Chaotic only in the sense that I am not organized at all in how I'm trying to ask this. I don't think I can ask it in a specific manner. First of all, I wanted to say hi to Dr. Safi because I was in the Middle Eastern Studies program with Patty and Doug in spring 2019, and then you came and talked with our class. So, and I have your Quran, so, but I just want to say. So what the context of my question is, I'm a student and then I'm still working just at home in Texas, and I work in catering and stuff, and I want to find my career path. And so I wanted to ask about if there's any glaring holes that anyone here has seen in the peacemaking space of vocations that you think to yourself, if we had someone who was doing this, it would be really helpful. If we had lawyers who were specialized in this, if there's any specific vocation or place that needs service that maybe you think it's like a very obvious, quick idea of like, oh, this is something that I continuously think we don't have this space filled within religion or politics or activism or anything like that. I don't know.
Let's start with Dawud on that one. He's living it.
Boy, let me think. Let me think about this.
Is she in Canada or United States first?
You're in Texas, right? You say you were in Texas? You're down in Texas.
Yes.
Very good.
I mean, there's always need for this space in education generally, I would say. Education generally. And I guess just from the perspective of urban planning, which I've spent a lot of time in, that's not religion per se. I mean, one of the things I didn't say, it was on one of my slides, but I was part of a team that established an interfaith commission in Charles County. It's literally a formal commission looking for opportunities for people of all faiths or no faith to work together to enhance various activities. But I would say, I mean, and I'll turn it over to other people, education generally, and then I'm sure there's always some room in international relations somewhere. Those two things immediately come to mind.
I was going to say State Department.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And then there's also depending on where you are, there's exchange programs, doing various exchange, Peace Corps, those kind of organizations, and even hosting people who want to come to the United States. You can be a host for someone who wants to come here, and that's a way to share another perspective by literally having someone become a part of your family or for some period of time.
Are there like also organizations that you guys think that really need reinforcement, or maybe, I don't know, that you're, whether it's even in Jordan, Palestine, New York, wherever it is, that you
send me a message on Facebook, and
Okay.
because I need to think about it, and I need a way to communicate with you if I think of something. So send me a message, please.
Okay, I will.
This is great because we're expanding the network right now by doing this.
Of course.
This is fantastic. Yeah.
Follow the spirit.
Yeah. Matthew, do you have a question?
Yeah, first off, thank you all of you guys for sharing, and it's been really cool hearing all the different perspectives, and yeah, I've felt this has really been life-giving. I guess I would have a question for Mark. It's probably a bit more of a niche question. In terms of, I was able to go to, we have the RJC, which is a Jewish community center here in, I'm from Winnipeg, Manitoba. And they have like a learning kind of, they call it, I think it's called Lamud, and it's just a place where everyone gathers and learns and talks about Jewish culture. And there was interesting because we had one guy who came in and he talked about how, I guess almost like law and in relation to Israel, Palestine, and the settlements. And his argument was that the settlements are completely legal and that there is no there's no legal basis for anyone to contest that, and that it's technically not illegal, and so on and so forth. I guess my question would be, how do you engage in conversation with that? How do you kind of go forward with almost like a dead stop in dialogue?
Yeah, it's a tough one, Matthew. I mean, what you're seeing is a lot of these institutions have a very, very clear agenda. They're not, Limud means study. This is not study. This is propaganda. This is hasbara. This is who knows where the funding and the money where that comes from. So it's disturbing. I'll tell you how I've been dealing with that. And I've come to this over years and years and years. When I came back from Palestine, my first real exposure to, which isn't that long ago, less than 20 years ago, and I came back to my Jewish community saying, look, you got to listen to me. There's a whole other story here. We have to hear the story. I mean, it's really, really important. And the doors of the institutional Jewish community basically really closed to me. And it was very hurtful and traumatic for me. And I sort of had to, I backed off. And I keep trying to engage, and it's the same rule or sort of rule of thumb that I've established for myself in talking to Christians. Because you can talk to some Christians, especially evangelicals, who you're on one side of the spectrum, and it's like they've got an agenda, and it's not a conversation. So I've learned to check in with myself and honor my impulse to engage, but to let myself know that when I realize that it's not a conversation, that for my own self, I have to withdraw and save my energy, and to go where there is conversation and where there is openness, but not to stop trying. So that's sort of the benchmark that I use for myself. So I think it's fine for you to go back and say, I hear what you're saying, but here's what I'm hearing and learning from others. And what do you have to say about that? And then see what happens. And again, check in with yourself. Is there a conversation happening here? And if so, honor it and go for it. And if not, take care of yourself and go where there's an opportunity. That's all I have to say about that.
You know, that feels really wise, especially as I've watched you in your career, and that's a little bit about brush the dust off your feet. And we've so often taken that to mean like your blood is on, you know, no, it's not that. It's we move on, but and then the dust can be our resentments around that, and say, no, wipe that dust off as you move on too, and don't be.
True. It's so true, Brad, because that's my own struggle. I have to struggle with I get angry. I know that anger is an expression of my own hurt and my own shame, some of my own sort of self-loathing for having once been there myself. So you have to, for me, I have a lot of baggage. I have to deal with that. Maybe it might not be as hard for you to deal with that and to see what you see about that. Because when I look at that settler guy, it's like I'm looking in a mirror, and it's hard, right? And then I have to thank God for the grace that allowed me to step out of that. But the only way I stepped out of that, the only way I would say the grace was to bring me to Palestine to meet that enemy. My favorite text for that is Genesis. I can't remember which chapter, 20 or something. When Jacob goes to meet Esau, and he thinks Esau is his enemy. He's afraid of Esau because of what he did to him, right? And Esau was coming at him with with an army, and he was going to try to kill him. And you remember what happens? Esau, that was the night before he met Esau is when he struggles with God with the angel and gets his name, Israel, right? Struggles with God. So he has this intense dark night of the soul before meeting Esau, and then he meets Esau, and Esau rushes up to him and embraces him as a brother. And he says, he looked at Esau and he said, I look at you and I see the face of God. So that was what happened to me when I crossed into the West Bank. And I crossed over that wall and met the Palestinians who were supposedly my enemy. I had been taught that they were my enemy. And I met them, and I was redeemed. I mean, I was saved in a way. That was grace. That was grace.
Thank you, Mark. Connie, do you have a question?
Yeah. First, I want to thank everybody. This has been mind-blowing, really. And I was also wondering if we'll get contacts. There's been talk about being able to contact, but that would be awesome. Anybody that is willing to share their contacts to keep conversation going. My question is maybe just honing in on some things that have been talked about already. There's been talk about curiosity, respect, listening, being an advocate. And I've been struggling with where to put in with organizations, but my heart keeps me away from organizations because doesn't ever feel like there's a really good solid fit. And so I've been working from the cellular level, trying to expand my understanding, trying to deal with sharing what I'm learning with the people around me. And I guess I was just wondering if there was anything I'm missing in, what avenues are available to me to try to, it just feels like I'm learning so much and I don't want to be a vessel that's full and not pouring out. I'm trying to figure out how to do that.
Let's stay in touch and figure it out together. By the way, I always have meetings with the multi-faith people in the United States and globally. They're always going on. So you can easily fit into one of these meetings and express yourself and meet other people and learn new things and share what you know with others. I mean, the door is totally open. We don't have any reservations about who to participate and what to share, and share whatever ideas you have, share them. Whatever information you have, share them and learn from others. Very simple.
Very simple.
Connie, if you can be more fortunate enough to find to in your career and in your work and in your everyday activities to be expressing that actively. There's so many ways to be out of here, and I'm sure that you're probably already doing that. But it's walking the talk that allows you to flow out. Yeah. Find cause if you don't have one.
I got done with one career and I'm kind of interim. That's why I'm, not sure where to go now.
Okay, yeah, take that as an open door. Safi is a connector. The book Tipping Point talks about movements that begin and they require connectors, and that he can bring you into conversations where you may actually just become aware by watching. It's like, oh, I'm being drawn this way or that way. And last but definitely not least, Virginia, you get the final question of the day.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I missed the beginning. I was with my daughter at a school event, so I'm gonna have to go back and hear the recording. So forgive me if I'm asking something that you've already answered. And I guess, well, I was wondering, are we all Western? And I guess we are all basically Western now if we weren't initially. So, because my question was like, so maybe scratch the Western bit, but as you're working with people from different perspectives, what do you find are common blind spots from our culture where we trip up, and even with good intentions, sort of you see like a common like foot and mouth? I'll give you an example, and Klager, this is for you too, because last night I've been like almost finished with my paper and sort of setting up this like performance art piece ritual with like different actors in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and like sort of embodying like a symbolic what symbiotic relationship would look like, sort of a living prayer. And I was almost finished, and then I'm reading one of my references was Mark Gopin's Holy War, Holy Peace, and then I get to this paragraph and I was like, fuck me, I'm gonna have to start a whole nother paper because this, he says, in the West there is a tendency for the peacemakers to take on themselves the sins of their own group, whether or not they personally committed those sins. More important, there is a dangerous tendency to forgive a whole group, implying that all are collectively responsible for crimes committed. What an irony that this is the precise foundation of the first stages of most ethnic violence, where victims are guilty because of their ethnicity and are held responsible as if they have committed all the offenses of a group. Indeed, there can be no mob psychology without this cognitive and emotive deed. Cognitive and emotive construct of the world. So collective statements may be well-intentioned, but are flawed from the start and betray embedded stereotypical thinking. So I was like, well, shoot, there goes my whole idea. But that was also a big alarm bell too. And that's sort of an example of my question of these things that you see. Do you see patterns of like these well-intentioned things happening that just like totally missing the mark on your journeys in this like interfaith dialogue? Give us some warnings so we don't out.
Virginia, I would just invite you, and I'll leave my email contact, to, if you'd like to have a conversation about Mark Gopin, that's the whole of the story, okay? There's an agenda there as well, in terms of his interfaith thing. So. I won't say any more.
I would love to have a conversation with you about anything, any of you guys. So anytime.
There you go.
I have a comment on that, or response on that question, and it just goes to in my I don't know if you saw my presentation. I talk about this book, The Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, and whether it's religion or ethnicity or race, it actually takes time. Like one of the 7 habits is seek to understand before being understood. And it actually takes some time to actually try to actually understand another perspective before you start to impose, or even if it's unintentional, just everybody comes in with a paradigm. I mean, that's just a fact. I mean, you are who you are, you were raised the way you were raised, you see things the way you do. And it actually takes some time to actually listen to someone else and actually try to understand another perspective. I mean, it's just, so I would say that what I see is a fundamental difference, and I'm bringing it, I guess, professionally back to planning and not a lot. I mean, I'm here, I'm in the DC area. I work on planning. I've developed plans with groups, and just taking the time to actually understand that someone's passion doesn't, if they're passionate about something, doesn't necessarily mean they're saying that you are wrong. They just have a perspective and they're passionate about it, and just kind of going in, just accepting that, you know, maybe this is actually a valid perspective, you know, and maybe I'm going to take the time to try to empty my perspective, or hold it to a side for a second to try to have a better conversation. So I find that that's, I don't care whether it's religion, race, ethnicity. There's a big thing going on now with Ghana in 2019. They marked 400 years of the beginning of the Atlantic slave trade with the program called the Year of Return. And so, to the amazement of a lot of Black Americans and other people of African descent from the African diaspora who went to Ghana, they found that there's a lot of differences between people. Everybody has brown skin, but they don't see things the same way. You know, it actually takes time to actually understand and listen and hold your thoughts in abeyance to try to get to a common understanding. So I would say that is it's a universal problem, that people do not take the time to put their perspective aside and try to actually listen and understand another person's perspective. And that's across the board. That's just across the board.
Thanks, Dawud.
Yeah.
I want to close our session today. First of all, again, a huge thank you to our speakers, to our students for the insightful questions, for the responses. And I want to close with a prayer, thanking God and asking God for help as we move forward as peacemakers. This is from Saint Francis. Lord, make us instruments of your peace. Where there's hatred, let us sow love. Where there's injury, pardon. Where there's doubt, faith. Where there's despair, hope. Where there's darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that we may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to love, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, in pardoning that we're pardoned, and in dying that we're born to eternal life. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all. And I especially wish our Muslim brothers and sister who's departed now a blessed and generous Ramadan as you and then to my brother Andrew, we're grateful that you could join us today, and we wish you a blessed Pascha this coming weekend.
Thank you.
All right, thus endeth the lesson. We will make this link available to all of you, and I'm very grateful again. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.